Today I'm continuing our series on grief apparitions, sometimes called grief hallucinations, sometimes called bereavement apparitions. Different people who use the term have different ideas about whether these are objectively present or are just subjective experiences. I'm talking about Dale Allison's ideas. Allison appears to take them to be, at least in some cases, veridical, in the sense that they're experiences of something that's really there, but not bodily. Now, Allison has said quite explicitly that he believes the disciples had visionary experiences after Jesus' death, that Jesus did not appear to them bodily, but he thinks that they thought Jesus was really present physically, or may have thought so. His idea is that this arose from the unsophisticated concept that the disciples had of what an apparition or a ghost could be like. So I want to read what he says here about folklorish concepts of apparitions. Let us now return to the disciples who had not read a single modern book or article on hallucinations or apparitions. If they operated with a folklorish idea of an ethereal ghost, a common idea in their world as in ours, what would they have thought if one or more of them had an experience like the people I quoted above? What, that is, would they have thought if their visions of Jesus were not opaque and dreamy, or in any way phantomic, but wholly lifelike, so that their experience did not match their culturally derived idea of a ghost? This is on pages 247 to 248 of his 2021 book on Jesus' resurrection. Now, when he talks about the people that he quoted above, he's talking about quotes he's given from people claiming to have experienced meeting with a recently dead loved one, in which the loved one appeared solid. In some of these, the loved one actually seems tangible to the bereaved person. I'll be talking about tangibility in the next video. So if these express real experiences, and if they can't be accounted for as dreams, and in some cases I think they can be, that's interesting, though, as I will emphasize later, all of the instances in which touch is claimed appear to be individual, not group, and as I'm emphasizing all the way along, Allison thinks that the really exciting group experiences in the Gospels were embellished at just those points where they diverge sharply from the apparition literature, which is quite convenient for the parallels he's drawing. But I'm quoting this here for that word folklorish, and to show that he's arguing that the disciples misinterpreted vision experiences due to their folklorish idea. His discussion of the apparition literature is meant to make our view of the apparitions more sophisticated, and to show that they don't fit with this folklorish view. He strongly suggests that Jesus' body disappeared, and that's where the claimed analogy to rainbow bodies of gurus comes in, which I've discussed elsewhere, and then that Jesus appeared to his disciples as an apparition. He didn't do all this highly physical stuff, but he was there in some spiritual sense, and then that they didn't recognize that because of their folklorish view of ghosts. And according to Allison, they thought that being a ghost would mean being a defeated victim. That's his phrase. Allison says Jesus wasn't a defeated victim of death, and that's what's important. And his disciples got that part right, that he wasn't a defeated victim. My husband calls this view of Allison's the Casper Invictus theory of the resurrection. Casper unconquered. Jesus was a victorious ghost. So yay, he was a unconquered ghost. But elsewhere, Allison makes a striking admission about apparitions, which he doesn't apparently realize is a very telling admission. I'm not really endorsing that all of these things he reports really happened, I want to say, but I'm also not delving into the literature myself. I'm noting telling admissions that are more telling than Allison himself realizes. So here is a quote. Apparitions of the dead often do nothing other than show themselves for a few seconds. I'm going to read that again. Apparitions of the dead often do nothing other than show themselves for a few seconds. He suggests that perhaps this happened to Peter. Perhaps, he says, Peter had a vision and that was it. In other words, perhaps Jesus appeared without saying or doing anything. And Allison suggests that that's maybe, he's just kind of throwing this out there. He doesn't endorse it. He likes to kind of throw out various possibilities. Maybe this is why we don't have a narrative story of a one-on-one appearance of Jesus to Peter. I myself would emphasize the restraint of the gospel authors. If they were as inclined as Allison and many others think they were to make stuff up, why not make up a one-on-one appearance to Peter? But this about appearing and doing nothing, saying or doing nothing, and appearing only for a few seconds is a really big admission. Remember that he keeps insinuating that there are significant parallels between the gospel accounts of Jesus' appearances and the apparition literature. But we have no gospel accounts in which Jesus appears only for a few seconds without saying or doing anything. And instead, we have gospel accounts in which Jesus appears and always says and does something, and often those are very physical, like sayings and doings. The conjecture that maybe Peter had an experience like that, where Jesus appeared for a few seconds and said and did nothing, is just totally out of the blue and without evidence. Allison himself isn't necessarily convinced of it, but I believe he shouldn't even bring it up as, hey, maybe, because that, from a historian, actually indicates some degree of plausibility to the theory. It even smacks of a conspiracy theory, the idea being, well, maybe this is what really happened, and Peter told people about it, but then that was suppressed because that wouldn't fit with the official view. This would be like saying maybe Buzz Aldrin gave an interview in which he said he didn't really walk on the moon and there was no moon landing, but it got suppressed because the official people didn't want us to know that there really was no moon landing. So it's just a completely silly conjecture. What I'm emphasizing here is the very telling admission about what apparitions of the dead often do, even on Allison's view. That sounds an awful lot like a folklorish view, even if they don't appear transparent, that they appear only very briefly, only for a few seconds. You just have a visual appearance. They don't say anything, they don't do anything, and then they're gone, and it's only for a few seconds. That should really shake the idea that the folklorish idea of a ghost is so far off. That is to say, even Allison is admitting something that sounds a lot like the folklorish view of the ghost. Now, Allison thinks he can brush this off by saying, oh yes, there are some differences. But I'm arguing in this series that if we're talking consistently about what we find in the Gospels, not doing a bait and switch and claiming it parallels what we find in the Gospels and then just switching and deleting part of what we find in the Gospels because it doesn't fit with the theory, there are not significant similarities at all to what we find in the Gospels. Now, next time I'll be talking about the important issue of Jesus being tangible and how that relates to Allison's claims. That'll be longer, and that's a biggie because Allison makes much of the fact that various people in the apparition literature claim to have been able to touch their deceased loved ones. So I hope you'll come back for that next time to the Lydia Magruder channel, where we're making common sense rigorous.